Hey everyone, thanks for coming to our YouTube channel and checking out Reunion. Reunion's mission is helping people find their way back to God. And our prayer for you is that you'd find a place that feels like home, that you encounter God, and that you'd be filled with more hope by being with us. And today we're starting a new series called First Things First. And as we come into this new year, we come with expectations and hopes. A deep desire for this year to be different than last. However, life moves so fast that we can easily lose sight of what really matters. Instead of choosing the easy or same path many of us follow without any thought, what would it look like for us to choose what is important rather than what might be urgent? And before we get to Nathan as he kicks things off, let me share about how you can get connected with Reunion. If you are in the Boston area and you are looking for a community to come alongside you as you wrestle with the hard questions in life, or you're just curious about God, we invite you to participate with us in Somerville and Davis Square. We would love to meet you and join our community as we do this life thing together. You can find all the details on our website, reunionboston.com. If you have your phone handy, also feel free to scan the QR code using your camera. It will take you directly to our connection card. Fill out the card and we'll reach out to answer any questions you might have about faith or how you can be a part of our community. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Now here's Nathan as he shares with us.
Hey everyone, my name is Nathan and I'm grateful to be back with you as we start a new year. That's right, 2024 is officially here. And I don't know about you, but there's something beautiful about a new year coming to me. It's like we throw out our old calendars, we put up our new ones, and with that comes this kind of massive reset button for all of us. You know, I think that's why so many people make New Year's resolutions, is because the new year comes with this kind of unspoken hope that we can be different people as we start a new calendar, right? That this new year invites us to do all of the things and become the person that we've always wanted to be. And I would guess that many of us have probably created some kind of New Year's resolutions or goals for 2024. According to a survey done by health.com, about 44% of individuals in the US will make some kind of New Year's resolution. And there's quite a few common ones. I'm not going to read them to you. I'm sure you know them by now. But here's the thing about resolutions. The stats of us actually following through with them is really not very promising or hopeful. See, according to a different study done by the Summit Medical Group of New Jersey, about 77% of individuals with resolutions will likely give them up in less than a month. You know, there are plenty of reasons for this, but I think one of the more common ones is that even though we want to change some aspect of our lives, we don't tend to count the costs of that change or what it will cost us for that change to actually come. We want to achieve the goal without making the sacrifice or needed changes to achieve it. We want a better version of ourselves, but we don't really want to change anything about ourselves. We set the goal, but we don't think about the shift we need to make in the way we spend our time or the effort that we put into something or how we're going to have to approach our day differently. We don't count the cost. And it's a new year for Reunion as well. And like many of you, we have hopes and dreams for our community in this coming year. And one of the things that we want this year is to really help our community grow in discipleship. You know, the past few years, we've really invested in trying to create a space for all of us to belong, for all of us to show up and to feel like we can be seen and that we are seen by, and that we see others, to find, you know, this place of belonging for us. And I hope that so many of you who participate in Reunion Weekly have found that here. You know, I hope that everyone continues to find that at Reunion in this coming year. But I know that a lot of us, we come here, we watch this video, we show up to church with some kind of spiritual expectation for the coming year as well. You know, maybe you log on or maybe you come to church because you believe in God for sure, but you haven't really taken the steps to actually make him the priority of your life. You know, many show up to church because they aren't really sure about this whole God thing. And maybe that's you, and you're trying to explore and see if this is actually, you know, if there's any truth to all of this, if all the things that Jesus say can actually bring the healing and the hope that he promises. That's why in this coming year, my hope is that reunion also becomes a space where we can wrestle with life's deepest questions, where we can come and try to listen to the ache in our soul and see if the way of Jesus is actually a path to healing that ache. A place where we can bring our doubts, we can bring our skepticism, we can bring our uncertainty and find a God who meets us in all of it and a community who walks with us as we wrestle and process. I hope that this year at Reunion, you desire to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and ultimately to do what Jesus did. That's why we're kicking off this year with this brand new series called First Things First. What does it look like for us to make God the priority in our life this year? For him to be the center of our lives and the things that we build our life around. As we come into the new year, we come with the expectations and hopes, a deep desire for this year to be different, to be better than last year. And many of us hope to be more committed to the things that actually matter, to really prioritize the things that are truly important. And that comes with it questions like, should apprenticeship to Jesus fall into that category? And if so, what parts of it should we really focus on? What do we need to prioritize our apprenticeship to Jesus? And what does that look like in everyday practical life? How do we count the cost of making that a priority? See, today we're going to take a trip with Jesus, who says some pretty startling realities of the cost of following him. We're going to follow Jesus around a little bit through Luke's gospel. And we'll start by setting the scene where the disciples have kind of been following Jesus for about 2 to 3 months. They're getting this framework of what it looks like to follow Jesus. And they have all these assumptions that this long-awaited Messiah, this long-awaited king, would lead them into battle against Rome. This is what kings did, right? As they observed the world around them, this is how kings operated. They used violence to seize political power and take what they wanted. And the disciples were probably following Jesus, expecting him to ask if they were ready for war, if they were ready to pick up their swords and fight. But that isn't what happens. Like I said, we're going to be kind of all over in Luke's gospel today, but we're going to start in Luke 9, where we read this. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" And they replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." But what about you? He asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "God's Messiah." And Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone or tell this to anyone. And he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life." And then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." Now, verse 23, that's one of Jesus's most common invitations to follow him. And we notice right away that before we can become a disciple or an apprentice of Jesus, the first kind of requirement is that we must deny ourselves and take up our cross daily and follow him. See, what the disciples were learning, what Jesus is showing us, is that at the center of discipleship to Jesus was not a sword, but a cross. And today, many of us were kind of desensitized to this symbol because we see it all the time. Like, it's all over church buildings. We see it in church logos and designs. We wear it on necklaces at times, but the cross was the most shameful way to die at this point in history. It was so shameful, in fact, that it was against the law for Romans to be crucified. And it was only reserved for foreigners who did the worst of the worst. It was a symbol of humiliation and death. That means the invitation of Jesus was and is, if you want to really live, then first you have to die. German pastor and theologian Bonhoeffer famously said, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die." And for Bonhoeffer, it was a literal death. I mean, he was killed ultimately for his faith by Nazi Germany. And obviously, in Western culture, we don't have to face that level of persecution for following Jesus. But Jesus wasn't just talking about a literal death, he was talking about a metaphorical death as well. It's this language of self-denial. This call to self-denial. I mean, even when we hear that, it sounds kind of alien to our modern ears, right? Deny yourself. A few months ago, we did this series called Live No Lies. And we talked about the barrage of cultural messaging we receive constantly through our devices. We constantly see things that say the exact opposite of this message of Jesus. Everything is about self-fulfillment, not self-denial. The idea of saying no to yourself to say yes to Jesus, I mean, well, it sounds kind of crazy. Many of us just can't fathom a vision of the good life that doesn't involve us getting exactly what we want. And we live in this age of self-fulfillment, surrounded by messaging. Things like the heart wants what it wants, or follow your heart, or you do you, speak your truth and be true to yourself. And we just assume that the way to a happy, flourishing life is through these things, is through following our hearts. Ethicist Robert C. Roberts says this: "We have been led to feel that the self-sacred, just as in an earlier time, it was thought never fitting to deny God, so now it seems never right to deny oneself." It's the self, not God, that is the new authority in Western culture. So what is Jesus saying when he says to deny ourselves? Well, the Greek verb translated here can simply mean to deny the truth or a statement, but it almost always has overtones of association or connection to a person. See, denial in the New Testament is this intentional disassociation from a relationship with a particular person. So really, like, a better translation might be to disown or to renounce. Self-denial is this intentional disowning of the self, or stepping away from relationship with the self as primary. See, the question Jesus is asking is simple. Who is our primary allegiance to? Is it going to be to him, or is it going to be to ourselves? So when Jesus calls for self-denial and cross-bearing, he is claiming authority in our lives. Following Jesus means disowning the self and giving allegiance instead to him. Like I said earlier, crucifixion was the most shameful way to die. And to take up one's cross referred to this practice of forcing a condemned person to carry the crossbeam of their own execution site. The condemned person was now so completely conquered that their last act in this life would be to carry the instrument of their demise to the place of their death. It was a show of complete and utter submission. A call to bear one's cross as part of following Jesus is a call to be fully submitted to Christ. But for Jesus, the cross was actually the entry point into life to the full. It was the entry point into the good life that Jesus offers. To really live, first we must die. And the cross isn't just something Jesus did for us, it's also something we do with him. I mean, think about it. We all still die. Jesus didn't die so we don't have to. No, he died to teach us how to die, how to follow him through death and into life. Again, the end of verse 24 says, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." I mean, this is a statement. Jesus doesn't say we could lose our life or we could save our life. He says you will lose or save your life. Jesus is warning us about the gravity of our decision to practice self-denial or pursue self-fulfillment, and about the trajectory of that decision on our souls. See, to say yes to Jesus' invitation is to say no to 1,000 other things. As the monks used to say, every choice is renunciation. To say yes to Jesus is to say no to living by my own definition of good and evil. It's to say no to spending my time and money however I want. It's saying no to hyper-individualism and to saying yes to living in community. Saying no to short-term pleasure and saying yes to long-term joy. It's saying no to having scarcity mindsets and instead saying yes to being generous to others. It's saying to Jesus, whatever, wherever, whenever, I am yours. But for a lot of people, this was too much to ask. We look a little bit further down the chapter. In verse 57, we read, as they were going along the road, someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. I mean, you would think that someone who's like, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you go. The response would be like, great, that's amazing. Let's go. We've got work to do. What are we doing here? Wasting time. But no, Jesus looks at him. He's like, are you sure? Are you really up for this? Because if you say yes to this, you got to be ready to suffer. But that's not the best sales pitch, Jesus. And look again, to another, he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me go first and bury my father. Excuse me, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. This is a first century euphemism, so we should note that. And that means I need to take care of the family business first. It's like he's saying, let me make sure that my parents are well taken care of, and I got the good job, and my retirement's all set up. And then when all that's taken care of, I'll come and join you a little bit later on. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. In these interactions, we see two people who are both on opposite sides of the spectrum. There's this one person who's kind of chomping at the bit and can't wait to follow Jesus, but doesn't understand the cost. And then there's this other one who makes a bunch of excuses of why they can't follow Jesus because the cost is just too high. Oh, I can't follow you right now because I got this going on, or I got this thing that I got to take care of. And once I reach security in my life, though, or once I achieve my dreams, once I've reached my goals, then I'm all yours, Jesus. Then I'm totally with you. And I don't mean this to like knock these two guys, because we all do this, right? We all try to justify our lack of self-denial. See, the problem isn't that the person in the story didn't believe in Jesus or didn't even see him as a good rabbi, maybe even saw him as Lord. He wanted to follow him. The problem is that he did a cost-benefit analysis for following Jesus, and at the end, he opted out. The issue is that he was not willing to pay the price to be a disciple or to be an apprentice of Jesus. He wanted all of the benefits, but he didn't want to pay the cost. Why do we have this gut-level inner resistance to Jesus's call? It's not necessarily because we're evil or even like narcissistic. I wonder if it's because we're scared. We're scared of losing something we value, something we think or something that we feel we need in order to live a happy life. This thing that we're grasping onto, thinking it's finally going to bring us the fulfillment or the joy or the peace that we're longing for. Back in the day of the Crusades, there were these knights called the Knights Templar. And legend has it that before going into battle, the Knights Templar would be baptized. But as they were baptized, they would hold their swords up above their heads as they went underwater. It was kind of this real interesting symbol. It's as if they were trying to say, Jesus, you can have all of me except this. Not my sword, not my violence, not my quest for glory. Maybe legends, maybe history, we're not entirely sure, but either way, the imagery here is piercing. Because this is all of us. It's probably not with a sword, but for us, it's probably with a bank account or a relationship or a reputation or a prestige or an entertainment habit or a political or even a theological position. The list could go on and on. But how often do we say, if not in words, then by our actions, not this, Jesus, please, not this? See, later on in Luke, we have yet another story with Jesus. Luke 14 says this: now the crowds accompanied him, and he turned and he said to them, we have to understand at this point, Jesus is getting popular, and there are so many people following him and trying to be in proximity to him. But once Jesus gets popular, he tends to do this thing where he says something that's very unpopular. It's like Jesus always has to poke and to prod and look around the crowd and try to figure out who is there for the right reason. So Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And you're like me, this is like great news, right? My brother can be super annoying. So not a problem, Jesus. I'm just kidding. Easy set. But this is what Jesus is really getting at the heart of this. See, in ancient Jewish tradition, when you talked about love and hate for family, it was about devotion and allegiance. If someone says, I love one thing, it means that their ultimate devotion and allegiance was to that one thing. And in comparison to that one thing, they may have a secondary allegiance, sure, but in comparison, they hate this secondary thing. So Jesus names the two great idols of his time, his family and tribe, and then self. And maybe in family and tribe is not an idol for some of us. Maybe it's work. You said maybe it's prestige or security or freedom or pleasure. But many of us, we try to hold these things in our hands and at the same time add God into the mix as well. But the problem is that these values are competing with each other in our hearts. That's why Jesus says that our love and our allegiance to him compared to yourself or compared to your desires has to be so great that it looks like we actually hate them. It means giving him allegiance down to the very depths of our being. And I understand this is so hard. Author Skye Jethani described himself this way in his book, The Divine Commodity, and maybe some of us can relate. My secret is that I want to be relevant and popular. I want my desires fulfilled and my pain minimalized. I want a manageable relationship with an institution rather than a messy relationship with real people. I want to be transformed into the image of Christ by showing up at entertaining events rather than through the hard work of discipline. I want to wear my faith on my sleeve and not look at the darkness in my heart. And above all, I want a controllable God. I want a divine commodity to do my will on earth as well as in heaven. So we have this belief sometimes that if we do the stuff of Christianity, we read our Bibles, if we help the poor, if we show up to church, maybe volunteer every once in a while, if we just do a few of those things, then we will get a slice of the beautiful life that the gospel promises. But in the same way, we often treat New Year's resolutions. We usually want the best of both worlds. So we want to be generous, sure, but we also want to be really rich. We want to follow Jesus, and we also kind of want to be really popular. We want character, but we don't want suffering. We want humility, but we don't want humiliation. We want patience, but we don't want to wait. We want kindness, but we don't want people in our life who annoy and agitate us. We want to hear God's voice, but we don't want to make time to get up early for prayer and sitting with the scriptures. We want Jesus, but we don't want to take up the cross of Jesus. I'm not sure if you live in this tension at all, but I know I do. There's so many days that I just want to be in the crowd following Jesus. But there is a difference between being in the crowd and being a disciple. Luke 14 goes on, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Jesus keeps saying this over and over again. And now Jesus goes into this hypothetical story. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. And right after that, another hypothetical story. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Jesus has some very strong language here, but what he's really saying is that before we jump in and look at Jesus and say, I'm in, we need to count the costs. We need to do the math. Jesus is reminding his followers that following this way will ultimately be worth it in the end, but also it will cost them. There's no such thing as a costless Christianity. Following Jesus is costly. There's no way around it. Jesus forces us to make a decision to follow him or not, to be part of the crowd or to be a disciple. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus gets at this idea by telling this parable that is literally one verse long. And this short story encapsulates how Jesus views following him. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. And then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. See, back in the days of Jesus, there were no banks. Couldn't just go to a place and store your money or your savings. So people would bury their gold into the ground. But a lot of times when someone dies, their savings would just be lost forever, hidden in the ground somewhere where no one could find it. And in Jesus' story, there's this man, and he's just walking in this field, and he finds this treasure. But the problem is he doesn't own the field. But luckily for him, it's for sale. So he covers the treasure up, and then he goes and he sells everything that he has with joy. Can you imagine his friends watching as he joyfully sells all of his possessions? And then they're shocked when he goes and buys this field and becomes more rich than any of them could ever imagine. This is what following Jesus is like. Was there a cost to buy that field? Yes, absolutely there was the cost. It cost everything. But was it worth it? Yes, it was, because that man became rich beyond his imagination. See, no matter how much you have to die or to give up or to let go of, we get so much more in return. When we die to self, we experience God's love. We become a person of love. We live deep, meaningful lives and relationships. We're present to the moment, and we are full of wonder and gratitude and joy and peace. When we live into the way of Jesus, we truly find a way of life that is joyful and meaningful. You know, psychologists and sociologists are just now catching up to the things that we find in Scripture over and over again. It is in self-denial, not self-protection, that we find life of beauty. Whereas Jim Elliot, who is this missionary to the jungles of Ecuador, he was eventually killed while he was on mission. He said it this way: he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. We see this reality all over our world. Yeah, I think marriage is a really beautiful picture of this. Marriage is this commitment fully to another person. When I stood across the aisle from Emily, I committed to her in many ways that for the rest of my life, I would deny myself. Because our I do's at the altar wasn't the end of our denying self. It was kind of just the beginning. Marriage requires us to die to ourselves all the time. I die to myself when Emily wants to watch Friends, the TV show, for like the 1,000th time. I had no interest in that show. I'd never seen the show Friends before I was married. And now I've seen it so many times. It is beyond belief. It's kind of embarrassing. But when I do that, I mean, come on, can I be any more self-denying? And to be fair, Emily has to deny herself whenever I want to watch the Bruins for like the third time in a week. Marriage requires self-denial every time I want to zone out, but Emily wants to have some kind of important or meaningful conversation. She wants to talk about things that are going on with our kids or pray through decisions that we need to make, all kinds of things. I have to deny myself whenever it's my turn to make dinner, but I really don't want to. I have to deny myself when she is in a meeting and I have to figure out how to keep our kids quiet in our tiny apartment for an hour. There are 1,000 opportunities each week for me to die to myself. And in the same way, there are thousands of ways that she is dying to herself each week. And just like the way of Jesus, what we get from denying ourselves is actually so much more beautiful than what we would get if we chose not to deny ourselves. Sure, I don't get to take a nap some afternoons, but instead I get time with my kids. Sure, I have to watch a show that I'm tired of watching and I don't want to watch, but instead of getting to watch what I want, I get to make jokes with my wife, and we laugh together and enjoy each other's company. This is the invitation of Jesus, to count the cost of giving up something urgent and self-gratifying to experience something better. Maybe for some of us in the room, the Spirit is already kind of stirring in us this one thing that we're holding above our head. We're like the knights when they are baptized. It's the one thing we cannot seem to give up. But for others, maybe there isn't just one big thing. And instead, this coming week, there are going to be 1,000 opportunities to deny yourself. There are going to be 1,000 chances to die. To say yes to Jesus is to say no to living by my own definition of good and evil, to spending my time and money however I want, to say no to seeking my own prestige and protecting my own reputation. It's not a futile grasping for control, but the freedom of yielding to love. It's saying, Jesus, whatever, wherever, whenever, I am yours. And following Jesus, it's really about those 1,000 decisions that we need to make between yes and no. Author John Mark Comer says it this way: following Jesus is like 1,000 small deaths that lead to one massive life. You and I, we have to count the cost. But don't just count the cost of following Jesus. Make sure you count the cost of not following Jesus. We said this before, but it's so true, and we really need to wrestle with it as we start this year. We are all disciples of something. We all trust something or someone to lead us to the life that we ache for. Whether that is faith in a professor or a scientist or a subculture or an ideology, or just our own kind of inner compass of desire. Every structure of a culture carries a worldview and a form of teaching that shapes our identities by forming our most fundamental desires. They cause us to approach the world in a certain way, to value certain things, to aim for certain goals, to pursue certain dreams, to be a certain kind of person. Have we done the math of where those are leading us? Jesus is just trying to get us to count the cost. Yes, discipleship to Jesus, it's going to cost us. To orient our life around Jesus is going to cost us, but saying no to Jesus or just being a part of the crowd is going to cost us even more. It'll cost us meaning and purpose. It will cost us love and kindness, joy, peace, patience, character, humility. Instead, we will find ourselves both anxious and exhausted as we try to keep appearances, all while we are trying to live our best life according to what culture says, which is ironically an ever moving target because when people finally reach the best life that culture is telling them to live, they are constantly disappointed and have to aim for something else. Ultimately, though, this will cost us a relationship with God. Jesus is just trying to get us to count the cost. As we start this year, are we willing to count the cost? Are we willing to take Jesus up on his offer, to die to ourselves every day so that what we find is actually true life? We're willing to deny ourselves, to take up our crosses, finding that as costly as a decision as that is, it actually leads us to a life worth living. Maybe this past year, 2023, maybe it was great for you, maybe it wasn't. But the promise of Jesus is that in both good and bad, when we choose to follow him, he finds hope, or we find hope and joy in the greatest and worst of circumstances. It is the promise of an always present God. It is the invitation to see if life with him could be better than the life we are already living. It's an invitation to see if what he is offering us is more meaningful and purposeful than what we are receiving from the things we are already pursuing. And my hope is that in this new year, you would be willing to give apprenticeship to Jesus a chance. Maybe for the very first time. Maybe for the second or the 10th or the 15th time. Maybe it's the first time you do it seriously, though. And my hope is that in that surrendership to Jesus and his way, we would come to a place of deep trust that Jesus actually wants our deepest happiness for us. Jesus wants for us to really live. In order for that to happen, we have to die. The cost is high, but the calling is worth it. I thank you so much for watching. Let me turn things back over to Matt.
Let's close with our benediction. May you depart knowing the invitation of God to move from comfort to insecurity, from what we know to what we have yet to discover, from where we have been to where we have yet to go, from safety to a place of risk. Go in the name of Jesus, our Christ, who said, "Follow me," without saying where he was going, just promising transformation and relationship with the triune God along the way. Live this week and this year praising the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace and live the church.